Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook. I'm Robin Hunicke, your host here for our indie series, interviewing developers who make games on the fringes, or in this case, on the edges of lovely gardens where they are truly, truly awful. Today, we are visiting with House, the makers of the Goose Game, which I'm sure you know all about. And we're going to talk a little bit about that snowball way, the way of creating games by being present with what they are and thinking about what's present in the moment in development cycle and not thinking so much about what's ahead, being driven by the creativity and the process itself. A fantastic interview. I'm super, super excited to bring it to you, especially to developers who are thinking about developing in a time of uncertainty. Here they are, House.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
We're going to be talking to House with Nico Disseldorp and Jake Strasser, who are joining us from Melbourne, down under. Hello, guys. How are you doing today?
Hi, good.
I told you it wouldn't take too long for me to break out that fake Aussie accent.
I'm glad.
You nailed it.
Welcome to the show. It's so great to have the famed house of the Untitled Goose with us. I don't want to do too much in the way of introduction. I want to let the two of you introduce yourselves. And I guess the first question I wanted to ask you is, where did you come from and how did you end up working together at House?
I guess I'll start. So when we can't see each other, we can't do the little glance we'd normally do. So if there's like a pause, that's us waiting to see if the other person's going to step first.
At the time of COVID, yeah.
So the four of us that are House, so there's the two of us and there's Michael McMaster and Stuart Gillespie-Cook. We're all friends first before we were making games together. We're a part of a larger friendship group and gradually kind of found each other as the other people who liked video games a whole bunch. And we're playing video games together, kind of getting a bit more seriously and playing critically together. And then it reached a point, I think a summer, where we had a bunch of free time that all overlapped and we decided to make a video game together just to kind of have an excuse to hang out. And that video game, we then got our friends to play it and our friends liked it. And things kind of slowly snowballed and we started taking it more and more seriously. And eventually it became Push Me, Pull You. And we were still going for about 3 years and then released it as a game on PlayStation in 2016.
So you were like a collective, would you say, at the beginning then?
I don't even know if we were as formalized as a collective. We were just a bunch of friends who were trying to make a video game and kept kind of getting little opportunities bit by bit and taking each one of them. And as we went, learning just enough to take the next step and get a bit more serious over time.
Yeah,
that sounds great.
Part way through the process, like when we started to think of ourselves as sort of being slightly more legitimate, we applied for some local games funding from Film Victoria, and they paid for things like a lawyer and an accountant to set up House as an organization. So I think we became a company, I don't know, maybe like 6 months in or something, purely because we were sort of just, that was the next door that opened and the next like little step to take. But
That's really great. I mean, that kind of funding is so rare these days. And it's such a fantastic thing to hear about it sort of taking friends forward in that way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Melbourne's pretty special for that. We're very lucky that we've got Film Victoria sort of throwing money around.
So you met up and you were friends and then you started working. Were you still in uni at the time?
I think some of us were.
Was it just Stuart?
Yeah, maybe. But by the time we were working on Push Me, Pull You properly, it was Stuart who was still at uni and like a couple of us had just finished or left halfway through a degree and Michael was working an admin job. And yeah, we just kind of all had the right amount of availability, like just enough that we could meet once or twice a week and sit in a kitchen or a bedroom and do a bunch of video game stuff together.
That's really fantastic. It's like such an indie story. It's like literally the bedroom game or the garage game, right?
Yeah, and then a bunch of other lucky things, like there was a program that was trying to fill empty spaces in a recently redeveloped part of Melbourne. So there were like these big buildings where not all of the suites had been rented, but they kind of wanted people in there to bring some life to the spaces, and we
Like seat
managed to get
fillers, game
yeah.
developer seat fillers.
So we got like a very cheap, like $100 a month office for a while, and that let us take the next step where we like, had somewhere we could go kind of every day or most days and get out of the bedroom a bit. And like with the grant that we got from Film Victoria that turned us into a company, it just was kind of it let us take this next step that I think would have been too hard and too scary as people who weren't getting any money to do this job. Like we didn't have a game to sell, so we couldn't really pay rent otherwise, but we got to kind of take our practice more seriously because this program existed.
That's really fantastic. So Jake, what was your experience of this process? Was it just like tumbling forward into development? Like, whoa, wait a minute, you turned around and suddenly you were on the boat and halfway across the ocean before you knew it? Was it intentional?
I mean, I think like Push Me Pull You looked very similar to the game that it released as like very early on. Like we had this thing that was fun and playable, and then realized that making menus and like finishing a game that took like two and a half years, I think.
It's like an
From
endless
the point that we
process
had like
of failures, yes.
like I think the feeling of it was just I don't know, just a constant like set of new opportunities arising, and us being reactive and like I don't know, excited about it enough to just like keep following things along. Like when Nick Sutner first emailed us from Pub Fund PlayStation at the time, asking if we were interested in being on PlayStation, like we were not at all ready for that sort of like attention. Like we thought maybe it was a scam. We like were looking at his email trying to work out whether it was legit. And like that was just another new opportunity that landed in our laps, and we've been incredibly lucky in that way. But I think we're also able to like I don't know, have the thing come to us and then like embrace it and let it carry us somewhere else.
It's interesting, just like, not to get super serious, but this is a strange time, right? I mean, we're all kind of in this weird uncertainty bubble. A lot of what's happening around us in the world is stopped, so we're just kind of paused in some ways. And then at the same time, because everything is paused, then what happens in the meantime seems really unpredictable and strange. And so it's interesting just to hear like the sort of Zen approach of like, well, there was an opportunity and we took advantage of that opportunity, and then we followed that to the next thing. Like that seems like a kind of, I don't know, like an intentional but like deliberate floating that is, I don't know, I would say maybe that informs some of your design thinking or your process in a way as well. Like I think it comes across somewhat in the games. And so how did you get that way? Are you just naturally chill? Is this just what happens down there, or what is the nature of that way of relating to your job and your livelihood in a way?
I think you're totally right that like the process of designing the Goose Game was starting with a model of a goose and going, oh, what can we do with this? Like the whole game, I think, was felt out in that way. Like we just sort of started with this one main ingredient and had a sense of where we wanted it to go, but really it was about just like letting this goose snowball and like pick up mechanics and pick up new ideas, and like we're just like the game was designed in the same process, I think, of like just feeling stuff out. and looking for like the right next step in each part of the process. How we became that way?
I don't think we had a choice.
Yeah, I think maybe it's like we're fairly safe. Like, I think none of us would ever want to take on financial debt. Like, I don't know, we all worked second jobs up until like 2 years ago. So like 4 years into a 6-year game development career.
So it was like a process of finding what worked for you without putting yourselves in a situation where you would be stressed by the uncertainty of what was happening, right? The
Yeah.
unfolding could happen naturally.
And recognizing that we didn't have enough experience to actually plan how to make a video game.
Mm.
So the best we could do was kind of just go, oh, well, we'll make a thing, and we'd try and make sure that if it's not popular, we'll be okay. But if it is popular, we'll be able to take advantage of that. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
With the Goose Game, we're like, oh, well, I don't know if anyone else is going to find this goose idea funny, but so long as we enjoy it and learn some things, then it's fine. We could always release it for free if it turns out to be a bit of a dud, or bury
Yeah.
it and never show anyone.
Yeah, I think maybe a big part of it is that, for me at least, like a lot of game development is the means, not the end. Like, we started working together because we enjoyed each other's company and like wanted to have an excuse to spend time together. And I think when you focus more on like that sort of day-to-day pleasure rather than the end goal, it maybe makes you more present and it makes you more, I don't know, mindful
Happy
in
not
that
to
way.
worry about it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
everyone that listens to this podcast and these interviews knows that I'm a Buddhist and that this is like a fundamental quality of the phenomena, culture as well. And I think it's like, I can remember the very first time we saw the Goose Game was when we were demoing Watam in the same room as you at Day of the Devs in San Francisco. And that our room was packed with balloons and children, and like the lines were so long out the door. It was like smoldering hot and sweaty. And we were both just like trying so hard to keep everyone happy at the same time as also dealing with what was kind of a success disaster in that room. And it's just funny that the two most Zen teams would end up in the same space with these like super weird games,
Yeah, totally.
So if you were to think about like the very beginning of Push Me Pull You and then moving through that process, did you start to feel at some point like you were becoming a real game studio? Like, was there a moment when you were like, okay, we're definitely going to have to leave our jobs? Or did that not happen until Goose Game was well underway?
We definitely like didn't ever think about leaving our jobs until we had money to leave our jobs with. We got funding from Film Victoria again, and then Panic got on board. So we were actually able to make that incredible step.
But that was halfway through Goose Game that happened.
Yeah.
Whereas for all of Push Me Pull You, I'd say we knew that this was kind of just us doing this thing because we were enjoying it, and that we should, even if we were going to be able to sell a thing on a PlayStation, which seemed really legitimate, we knew we ought not think it was more than a hobby, really, because we couldn't rely on it financially. So we didn't want to overinvest in that way. Like, we were happy to spend all our time on it, but not get to a point where we thought that it had to succeed or we were in trouble.
I think for me, because I studied film before, like I finished my final year at film school, the year we were playing games together, and then we started making Push Me Pull You at the end of that. So I spent that time kind of comparing games to film a lot, and like film felt like this known quantity that I sort of had a sense of I had a sense of how to do it. But even in my first year of film school, I was like, it was 2010, and like, that sort of era of indie games was happening, and like the prospect of being like a very small team and actually producing a thing that lots of people could play and experience like felt really tangible and possible. Whereas like in indie film, that didn't feel like it was a real thing that ever happened anymore.
Yeah, I
Um,
know what you mean. Because I was in LA at that time working on Journey, and
mm,
so it was definitely a period where my friends in LA that were trying to do indie films were having to borrow money from people that were very shady,
yeah,
basically kind of side money laundering type contexts in
yeah,
order to get
and
anything done because it was so expensive and the budgets were going through the roof. And at the same time, games were becoming easier and easier to make. And then, yeah, I mean, through PlayStation, for example, you could, with a press of the button, you could just get the game and
mm,
for a fraction of the cost of a disc game. And it was like such a great moment, I think, for independent gaming.
totally. And it felt like, I mean, it felt like to me at least, like people even at film school, people would spend like 10 grand on a movie, a short film, and then like a handful of people would see it. Um, and so just that people could make games that had huge audiences for very little money, and like it seemed incredibly appealing. I think like very early on, we started to feel when Push Me Pull You was invited to be shown at that party during GDC. Like the Rumpus people got in touch and asked if we wanted to show the game, and like we at that point really didn't feel like we were a part of the world of capital GD game developers at all. Um, but then to have our game like thrust into it, and have all these cool people that we sort of knew from Twitter play it, and sort of take photos of it and mention it and stuff. Like I think it was the start of a process of feeling like we were maybe a part of this thing that is just like again snowballed in its own way. Um,
Yeah, it's like a Katamari in a way, right? Like there's just
yeah,
there's like the initial I mean, I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand about that period of time as well, but like the Nick Sutners of the world, the people that were behind some of the parties and some of the curated events, like they had a massive amount of power in the fact that they could just kind of shine a light on a small game and suddenly turn it into a star. I think it's a little bit harder for people to do that these days. Things are
yeah,
very, very available, and it's a very different time. And so you happened upon a moment, I think, in indie development where someone could get discovered and immediately amplified by a very small select group of people with a very, kind of curated taste.
yeah.
And it's
As
funny because now, you think about it and like every store is a little bit overloaded. And I think that what's interesting about the difference between your first game and your second game is that your second game actually became a meme, which allowed it to transcend that constraint. So, is that something that you participated in actively, like as a team? Were you like, okay, let's make a game that memes well? Or was that something that was made apparent to you by the way that people reacted to it? Or was that something that people collaborated with you on, like, let's say Panic? I know Cable has a lot of he has a lot of sense about that internet and what drives views and stuff. Like, how did that kind of unfold? Because the game itself became really, really known in a way that many even indie games that are successful are not known. So I think that would be interesting for the audience to hear about.
do you want to take that, Nico?
Sure. So I don't think we sat down and said like, oh, let's make this very memeable or anything like that. But when I think about the things about Goose Game that translate well to it looking good in a GIF or a screenshot with some text written over the top or something, I think that mainly comes from us really valuing the spectator experience of playing the game, or sorry, of watching someone play the game. So even though Untitled Goose Game is a single player game, I think the experience of making Push Me Pull You, which was very much about bringing people together, having lots of people on the couch all participating in the experience as a group, made us really value being able to communicate things to people who aren't playing and wouldn't even necessarily have any interest in playing or experience with
Yeah.
playing similar games.
Like the
So
lulls that come from just seeing something unfold in front of you that someone else is directing.
yeah, so we learned through making Push Me Pull You to really value that experience of like, okay, we can't make anything too obtuse because if someone walks in the room and they haven't played this game before, we want them to still understand what's going on. And I think that kind of led us towards making a game that you can kind of view as an outsider and still understand really easily. Um, so things like, I don't know, on the ground, it's like things like avoid having too much heads up display or make it so those sorts of things are integrated into something that is easier to understand without a heap of games literacy. But um, also, I think that the process that led to that was lots of just us watching each other play, like sitting next to each other in the office and one person making something and the other people watching and just
And
trying to make
laughing.
a thing that felt good to look over and see and
Yeah.
laugh with. Yeah.
So this is again it's a returning to the process of like, okay, what entertains us, and like how do we relate to this, and then how do we create something that others can relate to in a similar way, right? Like to translate that experience of camaraderie, I guess, or like good times, maybe. But that's the thing, your character's kind of an asshole. So how does that, I mean, it's funny, right? Because you seem quite charming and not that way. So
Oh, thank you.
is the game some sort of weird expression of your shadow selves? Like would Ursula K. Le Guin like have something to say about the way the goose represents your group in an alternate universe or something? Like where does that come from? How did you come up with this idea of making the goose such a jerk?
um, I mean, really, that was just the animal itself. Uh, I think we got fascinated with a goose just because they look very funny. Um, and then the more we thought about geese and read about geese and realized just what the experience is of living near geese, which I must say is not an Australian experience in a big way. Like at least
Yeah,
living
it's
in urban
definitely
Melbourne,
it's an American experience and it's
yeah,
quite unpleasant. They smell and they're mean.
so we've learned, but we didn't really know. Like we started reading about geese and realizing that this is something that people on the other side of the world seem to spend a lot of time worrying about, and it really tickled us. Um, I'd say I'm a complete outsider to what it must be like to be scared of a goose. But the idea of a very bad bird, once we realized that this was a thing, it really captivated us, and we felt like we really understood this character and what we had to do to make it. Um, I'd also say that it is a very playful character to create. As much as their motivation is always very bad, and that might not be something that we share as people, in the context of a game, it's very fun to have a clear motivation like that and cause trouble because there are so many ways to cause trouble. You can get really creative with it and make your own little stories, and the stories all tend to make sense because the goose's motivations are so clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting when you think about it. Like, how many games that we sort of celebrate as a culture of developers really give you the opportunity to grief in a way that's fun. You know, like The Sims is a good example of a game that, like, if you really want to, you can be very, very mean in it. And you can be mean to the Sims. You can make the Sims be mean to each other, you know, like this is, but there are not a lot of opportunities to truly grieve in a way that is lighthearted and also evil. Like it's a fine line, you know. There's not, maybe this is a category now of like cute griefers, you know, like wholesome grief. Like I don't know, maybe. But
I
like
think
as you were working on it, did you have discussions about like is it too mean or what's the boundary? Like how mean can the goose be? Like what was that like?
I think we definitely have a boundary for. I also I don't know that I actually like think of the goose as a jerk or that mean. I find it quite hard to put myself in that shoes because it's definitely how our audience sees it, um, and how it exists as a meme. But I think I find it really hard to even put motivation on the goose at all. Um, like I see it as more like a force of nature than a thing that could be like simplify it into like having a personality even.
Like a process.
Yeah, the goose is just a way to just like get in these people's lives and like wreck them. And in terms of like, we definitely have I think a thermometer for meanness or whatever. Like the goose should never be able to do something that like couldn't be fixed up in an afternoon, for example. Like the stakes are always very low.
Right, like
Sometimes we have
mildly
to change
irritating.
things. Like I
Not
remember,
devastating.
yeah, I remember the original animation for when the man falls on his bum, the old man. He looked like he really got hurt, and it was a bit distressing. So Stuart had to go in, and he looks like he's really kind of got a bad back the rest of the time. But the second he falls on the ground, suddenly he's like really sprightly and waving his arms around, and he looks like he's fine. So there are a few times we had to like hold the punch. But I wouldn't say that the reason why people really enjoy being cruel in this game is necessarily just because it's not too mean, but because it's mean in a way that feels like it goes with the story. So when you're mean in The Sims or I don't know, Red Dead Redemption or something, it often feels like you're being naughty and you're breaking the game a little bit. Like the game doesn't want you to be this cruel. Whereas this is a game where every time you're mean, we kind of give you a thumbs up and say like, yeah, keep going, keep going. We did want you to do that. So I think it feels like it flows a bit better to do griefing in Goose Game for that reason.
I guess you could say it's kind of like it's RP, like you're on the RP server as Goose, and that's
Right.
like you're fulfilling the natural need of the goose, as like, you know, the story of the frog and the scorpion, right? Like it's in my nature, right? Like it's just in my nature to be this way, and so therefore it's one of a piece with the actual story in a way that, yeah, you're right. Like if you're in Red Dead and you just randomly walk up to a stranger and shoot them in the face,
Yeah.
it does feel pretty bad.
Red Dead Man doesn't do that. He's nice sometimes.
My favorite thing is to cheat at cards or shoot everybody and take the money. Like just do that kind of stuff. Like, oh, I don't care about it.
Well, my Red Dead Man doesn't do that. But yeah, it takes the guilt away a bit, I think, knowing that like you're the goose and like Jake said, you're a force of nature a bit. So I think you can not worry so much about whether you're breaking the roleplay.
And I think like lots of players like the success of GTA and stuff. Like people want to play games like this. They want to go in and wreck stuff. But yeah, most of the time the game's sort of telling you that you're doing the wrong thing. But AIAS just happens to, yeah, like Nico said, gives you the thumbs up. Tells you to keep going.
This idea of giving the thumbs up, like this is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I've been thinking a lot about how a lot of games are essentially, especially larger or like more popular franchises of games, a lot of them are about this idea of sport and like the challenge of can you perform what the game needs you to perform in a way that allows you to get access to new things. You know, like can you basically, are you good enough to unlock the next chapter? And I've been thinking a lot about the exact opposite, actually, which is everyone is good enough to get the next step, and it's just about how you get it, and like doing it your way is more the focus. And so very much like, in a way, like, you know, when you go to a nightclub, let's say, if you go to a nightclub like we used to in the before times, and you order bottle service, right? And like they come out with a champagne and there's like sparklers on it, and yay, you spent $150 or $300 or whatever it is, right? Like that's literally, it's a gimmick, right? Like the bottle of champagne is $25, maybe $30, and like what you're getting is this massive amount of thumbs up, like, congratulations. This is like the biggest thumbs up you get for the 400% markup that you spent on this bottle of champagne. And then as you increase your spend, you get more thumbs up, and people just, they eat that up, right? But there's a way of doing it that is also not predatory, I guess. It's like kind in a way. And I feel like your games have this quality, which is really interesting. Like, you're rewarding me for doing something that is a little bit naughty, but you're not giving me like a 10x thumbs up, right? You're just giving me enough to make me want to do it again. And like, did you have discussions about like, okay, this is enough? Like, like how did you get to that place of like wholesome grieving, I guess, is really what I'm asking.
In terms of thinking about player motivations, like we kind of take for granted that people will want to do the stuff that we put in the game. And really, at least with the Goose Game, we just kind of made ways for people to find it. So the little list of checkbox items that you've got, your to-do list, the goose's to-do list that somehow they have, even though they're a goose, is really just there to kind of give you a little prompt towards all the different parts of the game that are there for you to engage with and play with. I don't know if we thought too much about like, oh, is this enough reward or anything like that? Like, really doing the thing is meant to be pleasurable enough that that's reward in itself. But we kind of needed the prompt system there just to let you find it all, and make sure that you were never walking around aimlessly, or if you were, only just the right amount.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the really difficult part. Did you do a lot of play testing to sort of see when people started to wander and get aimless? Like, how did you
Absolutely.
set those
Yeah.
those limits? Yeah.
Definitely, we did a lot of play testing, particularly early on, very early on, just to see how people were kind of understanding this kind of game and what it's like to play as this goose and stuff. And then we kind of went, okay, we know what this is now. Let's make a whole bunch of this. And we went and made the rest of the village after making that starting area. And then once it was kind of close-ish to being finished, we just got people in to play it maybe twice a week and watched people play from beginning to end, which was a little bit grueling for some people,
I was going
depending
to
on how
say that's
fast they
always
were.
tough.
But our friends were very generous with us. And I guess in that process, tried hard not to shave off too many of the spiky bits, because we realized that people failing a lot or getting stuck a lot could actually be really enjoyable for them. But trying to work out when it was a problem and when people needed just some extra help understanding something, or we could give them extra help in a way that didn't take away from the thing that made it feel momentous in the first place.
Yeah. There's actually a conversation that I had long, long ago when I was working at EA, actually, and someone was sort of saying that like one of the problems with like the large game studio production model is that it shaves off too much of the spiky bits. It like ends up kind of creating this kind of lowest common denominator, which all things come through. They have the same shape, but in that way, they're not interesting. Like they don't have the corners of weirdness that make them lasting, with the player, like that engage the player's curiosity. And it was a conversation around The Sims and how The Sims has always tried to create these like weird corners and alleyways in the gameplay that if you really push down, like you can find places in the gameplay that are memeable or that are shareable or that are very unique to your character sets, in a way that's really compelling and that you want to show other people you found. And that's a hard thing to do. Even it's a hard thing to do in a small game. It's a definitely hard thing to do in a large game. Did you have moments where you were like, okay, this game is getting too big, like we're getting too beyond, or were you able to sort of like, okay, this is the core thing and these are the missions, and then just like focus on those, the mechanics of each level and move it through that? Like, how did that work for you?
I think in the same way that we're like working in that snowball way, we never really. I don't think we're very good at not really getting too far beyond, like not even thinking too far beyond where we're at at any given point. Like we finished the garden level, the first level of the game, that was our sort of prototype, and that was the first thing that was the way that we, yeah, like you said, like that gave us a sense of what we had in our hands and what this game actually was. And even when we started to then like broaden our perspective more and like start thinking of the game as a whole, we were still working in a very like, I don't know, taking pretty small steps through that process too. Like even though we had a sense of like, oh, okay, well, now we want these 3 other levels and we want this to happen and we want this to happen. Day to day, we're still just mostly 4 people, and so I think our capacity to get really far beyond beyond our abilities is fairly limited.
Yeah, it's not like we said we'll make exactly this much game. We just said, oh, we want it to kind of feel like 4 times what we have right now. And then eventually we got to a point where we're like, oh yeah, it seems mostly like that. Let's stop.
even like the ending of the game, which I'm really proud of, like that came about because we just knew that we needed a thing that would finish the game and that felt like an ending. Like to me, its main criteria was to just feel like closure.
Yeah, we got to the end. We were finished, so we needed an ending. And then
okay,
what do we have? We've got the village. We'll make you go through it. And I think the opportunities are kind of there in your game when it comes time to find something like an ending. Like you can kind of look at what you've got and work out what feels right. Like if we'd like spitballed a bit earlier what the ending could have been, but of course those ideas weren't nearly as good as the one that was obvious once the game was actually finished and it was time to make it.
Yeah, that's a very hard thing to explain. Like I teach in games, and so my students are just coming up on the end of a 3-quarter sequence. So they've been working together for a whole year on their games. And the first quarter is they do a series of prototypes with different people, and then they kind of form a team. And then the second quarter is another 10 weeks. And that's like, okay, let's try to get to sort of something like a vertical slice of like a demo that we think we could produce. And then this last 10 weeks is essentially, okay, we've built something that kind of works. We can put assets into it. And then about week 4, they start to go from having like this very tortured, like long process of getting stuff into the game to getting to a cadence. And then suddenly every week the game is getting better and better and better. And they feel like a team, it's like they're moving through the process of building a game together in a way where they're all on the same page. They're all saying, complementary tones, and they're kind of harmonizing. And it's so awesome. Like it's tragic because they get to the end of the school year and they've just hit their stride. but it's such an amazing lesson because you teach them all year, like, okay, this is what it's going to feel like when you get there. And these are the ways in which it's not going to feel good until you get there. But then when you get there, you'll be able to test your game with people every day, every week, and you'll be able to see like exactly what you need to do to make it better and how to tune it and where it's not cozy enough or where there's not enough edges or where the dialogue is too long. Like you'll see this, like the game will reveal itself. It is impossible to believe that, I think, until you've had the experience, right? Like it's just, you can't communicate that with words. It's like telling someone what it's like to finish an Ironman race, or like to summit a peak, right? Like a 16,000 foot peak. Like until I'd done it, I had no idea what it would feel like. And I always imagined that like climbing a mountain that tall, that it would be this epic thing. But actually the last, 1,000 feet is just like very, very, very exhausting. And you're really cold and you don't really want to go over the top. It's like, you're just kind of like, maybe I should just turn around now. And then when you get over the top, it's like, okay, I did it, but you don't really feel it until you're about, 7,000 feet down. And then you're, oh, wow, the air is much better here. My brain is much more functional. Hey, I did a really hard thing. And so I think that's a very interesting thing. You stayed 4 people through the whole process, right?
We worked with contractors as well.
Okay.
So we worked with M. Halberstadt, who did all the sound, the non-music sound in the game. Dan Golding, who did the sound for both Push Me, Pull You and the Debussy adaptations and radio songs for Untitled Goose Game, and Hunicke, who did additional art and animation, and Cherie Davison, who did additional programming. So
you were still
in the
though
end, a fair bit.
you were quite a little unit,
Yeah. But it was kind of the four of us full time sitting in the room for most of it.
Yeah.
And making a bunch of decisions together. Just back to your earlier point about kind of not really knowing what you're in for until you've kind of done it. I definitely think that's true. And another reason why that kind of taking it one step at a time is so important, because I think if someone could kind of go back in time and tell me the scope of Untitled Goose Game, I would never have tried to make this game at all. I would have known, I would have been clever enough to know that that was a bad idea to try doing that as such beginner game makers. But we've made a little goose walk around on a screen, and we thought it was the best thing ever, even when it was just a little goose walking around on a screen. And I think that that kind of naivety of just loving the thing that you make because you made it yourselves, that kind of let us keep working on it for long enough that it started to resemble the thing that we thought it was all along.
This is actually something that we try to do a lot in the program, is to tell them, listen, it doesn't matter whether your game is going to be commercially successful or whether it's, a sort of like one step away from a game that already exists, but it's yours. Like whatever it is, as long as you want to work on it, then you'll get it done. Like this is it's a core message from very early on. And I think kind of what our conversation is highlighting is that you never really did buy into this idea that making games would make you rich and famous, or that they would like somehow solve all your problems, that like you were doing it for the reasons that we often encourage, which is to just see what the medium holds and like what delights you to like live your best life as a developer in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Did you both have just like incredibly supportive and loving parents? Because it's so often the case that people get into games for reasons of like grasping, or wanting things. And it sounds like you really did just do it because you found it fun.
I think we were lucky enough that we like followed some game developers and knew that it was going to be tough to make money out of games. So like we didn't hold any illusions of this being like an easy way to make a big career or something. Like we did keep it grounded and just say, okay, well, we're just going to enjoy making the thing that we like. And I guess with Jake having the film experience and Michael and Stuart both being artists, like that kind of practice-based way of making something was the more familiar lens than like comparing ourselves to big video game success stories or something.
You'd also had the GFC, which was a big impact on Australia. So when I first went down to Australia, I was going to say the right after Journey shipped, I remember going down to GCAP and it was like kind of a grim scene. There was like a lot of things had changed and the industry had changed locally, and a lot of indies were starting up in the way that you did, because the economics of being a developer in Melbourne were really different than they had been even just a couple of years earlier, right? You'd had a lot of people just kind of pull out all of a sudden. And that, I don't know, I feel like it's made your scene really supportive and like collaborative and chill in a way that is really unique. Does that read with you?
Yeah, I think not having a AAA industry in Australia does mean that people are very excited about non-commercial work. There's no like other games. Well, I guess there is commercial work still, but it's all viewed, non-commercial work's viewed on the same level. And obviously our work is commercial work now, but I think treating it like a hobby doesn't make you less legitimate than some other bigger games industry that you're in the shadow of or something.
Who were the people that were really supportive of you when you were kind of in that middle meandering phase? Like the people that you looked to for advice and like just like inspiration, like on Twitter or whatever. Who were those folks?
One of the first people in Melbourne who really reached out to us was Li Shanglun. they'd made a game called Stickets, for example, and they've made a lot of puzzle games, flash games, and had been to GDC and all these things that we hadn't done as people who didn't make games before and didn't really know anyone who did. And they just reached out to us and said, "I'd love to meet you. Please come and meet me." And then they just kind of told us a whole bunch of stuff, all this insider knowledge of like, hey, you could probably get a Film Victoria grant. There are events on like Free Play in Melbourne that you should attend, and went out of their way to introduce us to people. And I think Li Shanglin, who I really admire, has gone out of their way to do that for a lot of people who make games in Melbourne and just connect people. And there are other people who do those same things. And it's just incredible the generosity that people like that show. And we're really indebted to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is actually, people talk about this a lot when they ask me, like, how did I get into game development, or what was the impetus for becoming a game developer after being in graduate school for years and years and years as an AI researcher or whatever. Like, why did I leave just shy of finishing a PhD and join the community? And I always say it was because I found so many people in the space that were so interested in, I mean, just even the fact that like, that there were people that were interested in sort of saying, what if we just made a bunch of games over the weekend and gave them away for free? You know, like, we'll call it a game jam. Let's see what that's like. You know, this idea was so strange at the time, and yet it was so revolutionary, and it created so many pathways, right? And I think that a lot of people in our community, I don't know, I hesitate to say that we're the dreamers of the dreams, you know, sort of the, you know, the Charlie, you know, sort of Willy Wonka kind of comment, but like, in a way, like, I do think it's true that game developers hold this, like, at least maybe what you're talking about is like sort of people that do it for the love of doing it. We hold this ideal that this is the potential to make something that is pleasing to us, that is like pleasurable in the moment, that has moments of joy, or, you know, pure aggression, or, you know, pure faith, or whatever it is that you're interested in exploring, and that these things become a driver beyond the commercial viability of a product. Like, I mean, even just something like Minecraft, right? Like, when Marcus decided to just quit his job and work on this random block builder, like, did he think that he would end up, you know, selling it for, you know, billions of dollars or whatever? Like, I doubt it. That's just like an absurd thought, right? Like, at the beginning of a project, it's absurd to think of like your game being a meme on a talk show, right? Like, that's not something that you set out to do. And I think that's an important lesson for people, especially now in this time of not knowing. Like, where are you now as a team? Like, how are you coping with, I mean, are you not seeing each other? Are you not in the same space? Like, what's the current situation for House?
Where isolation has been just a bit of a rest for me, I think. We're still on Slack together, and we started playing games together occasionally, but it's been a bit of a break, and one that we needed, I think, after a pretty big year. I don't know, I'm very excited to we're starting to kind of get working again, and it's been a thing that I've missed, I've realized. Even just having like, I've been doing hobbies while I'm at home, but it's just not the same as working with your friends.
What are your hobbies that you've been doing when you're not working on games?
I'm at the moment, I'm obsessively building a 1/700 scale model of the Colombo Express, which was the biggest container ship in the world for a while. It's I don't know. It's I think it's going to look awesome when I finish it, but it's also just like this thing hanging around my neck. I have a very mixed relationship with it.
My dad brought a ship kit home from Japan when he was a sailor in 1969, and it's still unmade in our attic. And I keep saying to him, like, you have to do it before you die. Like, you want to finish the ship. So don't be that guy. Get it done.
Hopefully it'll be maybe years.
I love that your idea of a big break from doing like level design and environment art is to make little models. Not on a computer this time.
Tiny model.
It's so small. You have no idea. I bought myself like a magnifying visor. I'm really going full.
And Nico, what have you been up to in the sort of like socially distant development times, like, and this break that you guys sort of unintentionally got? What have you been up to?
We've managed to do a few different game development things, which has been fun to kind of work out. Just working out the right programs and things to use, setups to make streaming a playtest work, which has been very fun. So we've been able to get people in other parts of Melbourne to remotely play Goose Game while we watch and stream it to us, which has been very good. But more recently, just painting, which has been very fun. But then, as always, and I think I can identify with Jake and his ship here, just gets a bit much after a while, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I've been drawing and doing watercolors. I've been doing a series on mandalas, which I've been meaning to do for a very long time. And when I got all the equipment and like the paper and all the watercolor stuff that I wanted, like pencils and all this other stuff, I was so excited. And then like about a week into it, I was like, okay, I'm really tired of staring at this circle. And then now I'm just like, why did I decide to draw like 1,000 fucking circles? Like COVID is a circle and my life is a circle, and like, what am I doing? Like, and I know that it's all going to lead to something important in terms of like games and stuff. And at the same time, it's exhausting. Like there is something about working with people that is so unique that like,
Yep.
Just today, I did a video call with 3 other people at Phenomena about a teaser video that we're doing for something, and we ended up having to go through the track and the voiceover and then the shots and the video, and like all I could think of the whole time was like, God, I just wish we were in the same damn room. Like it would be so much easier if we were all like pointing and putting our greasy fucking fingers on someone's monitor, you know? Like there's no way to like do the thing where you lean over and go, but what about here? You know, you got to like use your mouse and share your screen. And it feels so shitty. But at the same time, like, I'm so grateful that we have a collective practice, you know, because of the frustration with the individual practice. It's like, it's
Yeah,
just so
absolutely.
nice to make stuff, right?
Yeah, especially like now in the last few days, I started doing things like working on house stuff again, and just like that you can do work that's going to be like externally judged, or like just it's so much more satisfying to make things for other people than it is for yourself, I think. Like the boat is just like going to be this endless process that I have to decide when it's finished. Like, I don't know, that I can work for a day on house stuff and say, hey guys, look at this thing. And like people can see it and appreciate it. And I can know that it's finished. It's so much more satisfying.
Yeah, there's something really interesting about that idea of like, there's like a tiny little meter or like a little ruler that you can use when you're talking with other people. And like with yourself, sometimes the meter or the ruler is so high, you know, like it's so much easier to get into that hole of like, it's not enough when it's just you evaluating your own performance. But when it's other people going, hey, good job, like, cheers, that's great. Like it does motivate. It creates I don't know. In a way, it's like a little bit of a bridle for your ego, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's just that it creates a resolution as well. Like I think I don't really share things on social media. I don't know, I've never liked it, but I totally understand why people do, because it is just that moment of like release. You get to release the thing that you've done to to the world, whether that's like a photo of it on Instagram or whatever, but like it just like takes it off your shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Like I have been thinking a lot about what the response that we have is to this situation, and there's this book about loving kindness by Sharon Salzberg that has been really helpful to me, and she sort of outlines the sort of what she calls the revolutionary art of happiness, right? Like the revolutionary act of being satisfied with something. And she says the difference between misery and happiness depends on what we do with our attention. Do we, in the midst of water, look for somewhere else to drink? Transformation comes from looking deeply within to a state that exists before fear or isolation arise, a state in which we are inviolably whole and just as we are. We connect with ourselves and our own true experience, and we discover that what it means to be alive and whole. Consider how the sky is unharmed by the clouds that pass through it, whether they are light or fluffy looking or dark and formidable. A mountain is not moved by the winds blowing over it, whether gentle or fierce. The ocean is not destroyed by waves moving on its surface, whether they are high or low. In just that way, no matter what we experience, some aspect of ourselves remains unharmed. And this is the innate happiness of awareness. And I think that, like, what's so interesting talking to the both of you is that, like, your games are joyful and celebratory of forces that may not necessarily be joyful and celebratory, but they are as they are, right? And it just sounds like, talking to the two of you, that you are as you are. And that's, I don't know, in this time, I think that can be very encouraging to people who, especially younger people like my students, who feel like, well, what's the point of making a game if we can't leave the house? Or, there's no way to pitch it to a publisher. No one knows who I am in my weird corner of the universe, like working on this cool magical skating game, or this, like, game where you're driving blind, like, and it's all audio cues. Like, my students really struggle, I think, in some ways with thinking about how to pursue a career in the midst of not knowing. And it just, I don't know, like, I think that your story is really inspiring in that way, that you followed your bliss.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't envy them. Like, I think we also, the arc of our careers, set within the historical context that we were in. Like, that is, the industry 6 years ago is very different to what it is today. And I think, like, if we hadn't had all this external gratification, if we hadn't put the game online and Wild Rumpus found it and showed it to GDC and stuff, like, I don't know whether we would have kept going. Even if we were following our bliss, not to like stamp on your nice message, but I think, like,
maybe that points to something, right? Like, it points to the value of continuing to curate and continuing to sort of raise things up, like this like Wholesome Direct initiative and the IGDA initiative for, indies that I just recently joined, where we're trying to advise people through what will be trying financial times. Like, being able to do like what Lishan did for you, to give back to the community and show them the ropes, and, like, continue to open access to funding and sort of eyes and attention. Like, maybe this is a lesson that, we don't necessarily have the capacity to recreate 6 years ago in the games industry or 10 years ago in the games industry, but we can sort of try to recreate those tools now, right?
yeah,
Like, we
yeah.
can do it that way.
I've been thinking about. I was talking to a student. Interviewed me for a project. I don't know, it was a conversation recently, and, like, I was telling her about how I think, like, how it's important, I think, to enter games, or, like, to approach games as a hobby first and as a thing that you love first, because, like, I don't know, it seems fraught to go into it expecting to have a career that's going to make you money and all that sort of thing. And then I was thinking afterwards, like, how kind of shitty that is, that I'm this person who's managed to do it, and I don't want to tell young people, like, don't try for this thing, because, like, the world sucks and you shouldn't
Yeah.
aim to, like, have a livelihood, like, you should expect to be poor or whatever. That's
Yeah.
shit too.
That is
And I
shit.
think, like, the core for me with the thing that I came to is that, like, the thing that we need is, like, socialism, it's communism, it's a restructuring of society so that we can all do
Amen.
the things that we want to do. Like that's the actual solution. It's disconnecting people's livelihood from their work, and it's like allowing people to flourish in all the ways that they can. So yeah, I look forward to more I don't know, utopian visions of society or something. I think that's how we can all make games for fun and not money.
And I think if someone was looking to follow that approach of like doing the thing that you enjoy first today, of course the path wouldn't resemble what it resembled 6 years ago for us, but hopefully there are still opportunities out there, or maybe new ones have to be invented that work with the way that games work now. Like whether that's focusing on the people around you or your local area, like maybe you're making games for specific groups rather than trying to capture a wider attention, discovering niches or something like that. Keeping an open mind and trying to find what little avenue there could be for success for you, and then just following it is probably something that still applies, even if that path would be completely different today.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an ancient and well-tread path. Like all artists, all performers, all journey people, who felt the wanderlust or the urge to explore. Like we all are connected through the generations by this drive to find new things and then share those things with others. And that's a specific class of people. It's a specific group of people. It's not, it's not 50 and 100. It's probably closer to 2 and 100. But like, if you look at the ways that creativity and the arts and performance have created meaning over the generations, I think you find these same qualities of interrogating the now, but also being present with what is potentially true in a way that isn't grasping or isn't striving, but is really in connection with your own response to it, or like you said, the value that it creates in another group and the ways in which it reinforces, our values as people. And I guess, yeah, I mean, like, I think that it would be really lovely if people can sort of hear the story of House and, think about their own development experiences and really drive towards that place where, very much like what I've tried to build myself, we are able to be our true selves and to do the work that we feel is appropriate in the time that we have, and that we're grateful for it every day. Like that even when there is a strange challenge or an unexpected event, and things don't go the way that we planned, that we can work together to come up with a solution that meets everyone's needs while also giving us a sense of joy and follow through and like completion, right? This idea that it isn't this endless slog, that there is a way to feel like, okay, today I did a good job. Today I did the best that I could, which is, that's a very valuable feeling. And I think, to your point, Jake, it's not one that maybe, capitalist systems necessarily reward, right? This idea of today was enough is a little bit more ancient than that. And I think it's a good thing to try to get next to.
Totally.
Well, I thank you very much for taking this time to speak with us. It was so great to hear about your story, and I can't wait to see, of course, obviously, what evolves from House in the next little bit. We wish you, rest and respite, and also creativity, and staying safe in the midst of what is an uncertain time. And obviously, can't thank you enough for spending this time with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.